Oops, looks like white isn't your color, Zara.
Why would you do that?
The cafeteria fell silent as Nathan Thompson grabbed Zara's lunch tray and dumped it all over her new white dress. Mashed potatoes splattered across her chest while chocolate milk dripped down to her shoes. The other kids gasped, and some even laughed as Zara stood there frozen with tears filling her dark brown eyes. She had only been at Jefferson Middle School for 3 weeks since moving from Ghana with her family, and already Nathan had made her life miserable every single day. He called her names about her accent and made fun of the traditional African head wrap her grandmother had given her. Today was different though, because something deep inside Zara's chest was burning like fire, and her hands were shaking not from fear but from something else entirely. Nathan leaned in close with his cruel smile and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear that she should go back where she came from because nobody wanted her here. That's when Zara looked up at him with eyes that suddenly blazed with a strength nobody had ever seen before and said in a voice as clear as church bells that she had something very important to show him. Nathan laughed and pushed her shoulder hard, expecting her to stumble backward like she always did, but instead Zara planted her feet firmly on the ground and didn't move an inch. The whole cafeteria watched in complete shock as this tiny 12-year-old girl, who barely came up to Marcus's shoulder, stood her ground against the biggest bully in the entire school. Nathan was confused and angry that his usual tricks weren't working, so he raised his hand to push her again. But something incredible happened that nobody could have predicted. Zara caught his wrist in midair with reflexes so fast it looked like magic, and suddenly Nathan found himself flipping through the air before landing flat on his back on the cafeteria floor with a loud thud that echoed throughout the room. Every student in that room gasped and stood up from their seats because they had just witnessed something impossible. Sweet, quiet Zara, who always kept her head down and never spoke above a whisper, had just thrown the school's meanest bully across the room like he weighed nothing at all. Nathan lay there stunned and confused, trying to figure out what had just happened, while Zara stood over him with her hands on her hips and fire still burning in her eyes. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever until Principal Rodriguez came running into the cafeteria after hearing all the commotion. She expected to find Zara crying in the corner like usual, but instead found Nathan on the floor looking embarrassed while Zara stood calmly beside him with food still dripping from her dress. Before the principal could ask what happened, a dozen students started talking at once, trying to explain how the shy new girl had somehow defeated the biggest bully in school. Nathan scrambled to his feet and tried to claim that Zara had attacked him for no reason, but every single witness in that room told the same story about how he had been picking on her for weeks. Sarah Chun, who sat at the table next to them, spoke up and said that Nathan had dumped food on Zara and called her terrible names before she finally defended herself. Even some of Marcus's own friends admitted that he had been mean to the new girl every day since she arrived. Principal Rodriguez looked at Zara with new respect and asked her to explain what had happened, but Zara simply said that her grandfather had taught her that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself when nobody else will. That afternoon, news of the cafeteria incident spread through Jefferson Middle School like wildfire, and suddenly everyone wanted to know more about the quiet girl from Ghana who had shocked them all. Students who had never spoken to Zara before came up to her in the hallways, asking if she really knew martial arts and how she had learned to fight like that. Zara was overwhelmed by all the attention because she had spent 3 weeks trying to become invisible, and now everyone was looking at her. During lunch the next day, she sat alone at her usual table, expecting things to go back to normal, but instead, Sarah Chun and her group of friends came over and asked if they could sit with her. For the first time since arriving in America, Zara smiled a real smile as she nodded and welcomed them to join her. Sarah asked about her life in Ghana and seemed genuinely interested in learning about her culture and traditions. Other students gathered around to listen as Zara told stories about her homeland and explained that her grandfather had been a master of an ancient African martial art that focused on using an opponent's strength against them. She had been training with him since she was 5 years old, but had never used it to hurt anyone before that day. The truth was that Zara's grandfather, Kwame, had been one of the most respected warriors in their village before he became a teacher and healer. He had taught Zara that true strength came not from hurting others, but from protecting yourself and those who couldn't protect themselves. Every morning before school in Ghana, Zara would train with her grandfather in their backyard, learning not just fighting techniques but also discipline, patience, and respect for all living things. Her grandfather always told her that these skills should only be used when absolutely necessary, and never to show off or intimidate others. That's why she had endured weeks of Marcus's bullying without fighting back, because her grandfather had taught her that violence should always be the last option. But when Nathan had humiliated her in front of the entire school and told her she didn't belong in America, something inside her snapped, and she knew she had to make a stand. The technique she used was called the wind throw, and it redirected Marcus's own aggressive energy back against him, which is why he flew through the air so easily. As word spread beyond the school, Zara's parents, Kofi and Amma, were called in for a meeting with Principal Rodriguez, who wanted to understand what had happened and make sure there wouldn't be any more incidents. Zara's father explained that his own father had been teaching their daughter traditional Ghanaian martial arts since she was very young, as a way to connect her to their cultural heritage and build her confidence. He assured the principal that Zara had been taught to use these skills only for self-defense and that she would never start a fight with anyone. Principal Rodriguez was impressed by the family's values and decided that instead of punishing Zara, she would ask her to help start a conflict resolution program at the school. The principal had noticed that bullying was becoming a bigger problem at Jefferson Middle School and thought that Zara's unique background and natural leadership qualities could help other students learn better ways to handle difficult situations. Zara was nervous about taking on such a big responsibility, but her parents encouraged her to use this opportunity to make a positive difference in her new school. The following week, Zara found herself standing in front of the entire school assembly, feeling more nervous than she had ever been in her life. Principal Rodriguez had asked her to share her story and explain how students could stand up to bullies without using violence. Zara's voice shook at first as she began speaking, but as she looked out at all the faces in the audience, she remembered her grandfather's words about finding strength in truth. She told everyone about growing up in Ghana and how her grandfather had taught her that real courage meant helping others even when you're scared. She explained that she had endured Marcus's bullying for weeks, not because she was weak, but because she was trying to find a peaceful solution. The moment she finally fought back wasn't about revenge or showing off, but about standing up for her right to be treated with respect. She encouraged other students who were being bullied to speak up and ask for help instead of suffering in silence like she had done. By the time she finished speaking, the entire auditorium was quiet, and many students had tears in their eyes as they realized how much courage it had taken for this shy girl to share her story. Nathan Thompson sat in the back row of the assembly, feeling ashamed and confused about everything that had happened. He had been suspended for 3 days after the cafeteria incident, and during that time he had done a lot of thinking about why he had been so mean to Zara. The truth was that Nathan had his own problems at home, and taking out his anger on smaller kids made him feel powerful and in control. His parents were going through a messy divorce, and he felt scared and helpless most of the time, so bullying others was his way of dealing with those difficult emotions. Listening to Zara speak about courage and standing up for what's right made him realize how wrong he had been to treat her so badly. After the assembly, Nathan waited outside the auditorium until Zara came out, and then he walked up to her with his head down and his hands shaking. In front of all her new friends, he apologized for everything he had done and admitted that he had been taking out his own problems on her. Zara looked at him for a long moment and then surprised everyone by telling him that she forgave him. and hoped they could start over as friends. The transformation at Jefferson Middle School was remarkable as Zara's story inspired other students to speak up about their own experiences with bullying and find better ways to resolve conflicts. She started a weekly discussion group where kids could talk about their problems and learn from each other's experiences. Students who had been enemies began working together to create a more welcoming environment for everyone. Nathan became one of Zara's biggest supporters and used his influence with the other kids to stop bullying whenever he saw it happening. Teachers noticed that the school hallways felt safer and friendlier as students began treating each other with more kindness and respect. Local news stations heard about the amazing changes at Jefferson Middle School and came to interview Zara about how one moment of courage had transformed an entire school community. She appeared on television wearing the traditional African head wrap her grandmother had given her, and spoke about the importance of celebrating differences instead of using them to hurt others. Her grandfather back in Ghana watched the interview online and cried tears of pride, knowing that his lessons had helped his granddaughter become a leader and role model for young people in America. 6 months later, Jefferson Middle School was recognized by the state education department as having one of the most successful anti-bullying programs in the country. Zara had not only found her place in her new home, but had also discovered that her unique background and experiences were actually her greatest strengths. She learned that being different wasn't something to be ashamed of, but something to be celebrated and shared with others. Her friendship with Bryce showed everyone that people can change and grow when they're given a second chance and treated with compassion. The shy little girl who had once tried to make herself invisible had become a confident young leader who inspired others to stand up for what's right. She kept training with her grandfather during video calls every week, and he reminded her that true warriors fight not to defeat their enemies, but to protect their communities and spread peace. As Zara walked through the halls of Jefferson Middle School, surrounded by friends from every background and culture, she knew that she had finally found where she belonged and that her journey was just beginning. 3 months after her television appearance, Zara received an unexpected invitation that would change her life forever. The National Youth Leadership Council had heard about her work at Jefferson Middle School and wanted her to speak at their annual conference in Washington, D.C. Thousands of teenagers from across America would be there, along with teachers, principals, and education officials who wanted to learn from her experience. Zara felt overwhelmed by the honor, but also terrified at the thought of speaking in front of so many important people. Her parents were incredibly proud, and her grandfather Kofi flew all the way from Ghana to accompany her to the capital city. Standing in the airport waiting for his arrival, Zara could barely contain her excitement because she hadn't seen him in over a year. When he walked through the gate wearing his traditional kente cloth robe with a huge smile on his weathered face, Zara ran into his arms and cried tears of joy. Her grandfather held her tight and whispered in her ear that he had always known she would do great things, but even he had never imagined she would become a voice for children all over America. The night before her big speech, Zara sat with her grandfather in their hotel room, overlooking the Lincoln Memorial, while he told her stories about his own grandfather who had been a great leader in their village many generations ago. He explained that leadership was not about being the loudest person in the room or having all the answers, but about listening to others and helping them find their own strength. Her grandfather reminded her that the same courage that had helped her stand up to Bryce in the cafeteria would help her speak truth to power at the conference. He taught her a traditional Ghanaian prayer that warriors would say before going into battle, not to defeat their enemies but to protect their people. As they practiced the prayer together, Zara felt the same fire burning in her chest that she had experienced that day in the cafeteria, but this time it felt warm and peaceful, like the sun rising over the mountains back home in Ghana. Her grandfather told her that this fire was the spirit of all their ancestors who had fought for justice, and that it would give her the words she needed to touch the hearts of everyone listening. The next morning when Zara walked onto the stage at the Kennedy Center, she was amazed to see over 5,000 people in the audience, including students, teachers, parents, and government officials. Her heart was pounding so hard, she could barely hear the introduction, but when she looked out into the crowd and saw her grandfather's proud face in the front row, she remembered everything he had taught her about finding strength in truth. She began by telling the story of her first day at Jefferson Middle School when she had felt so alone and afraid, but instead of focusing on the pain, she talked about how that experience had taught her that every person has the power to make a difference in their community. Zara spoke about the importance of seeing bullying not just as a problem between individual students, but as a reflection of larger issues in society, like racism, prejudice, and the fear of people who are different. She challenged the adults in the audience to examine their own behavior and ask themselves whether they were creating environments where all children could feel safe and valued. The most powerful moment of her speech came when Zara invited Bryce Kellerman to join her on stage. The audience gasped in surprise as the boy who had once been her tormentor walked out wearing a suit and tie, with his own parents beaming with pride from their seats. Together, they told the story of how their conflict had transformed not just their own lives, but their entire school community. Bryce spoke honestly about his struggles at home and how he had used bullying as a way to deal with his pain and confusion. He talked about how Zara's forgiveness had given him the chance to become a better person, and how working together on anti-bullying programs had taught him that real strength comes from lifting others up instead of tearing them down. When they finished speaking, the entire auditorium erupted in a standing ovation that lasted for nearly 5 minutes. Many people in the audience were crying as they realized they had just witnessed something extraordinary. After the conference, Zara and Bryce were invited to meet with senators and congressmen who were working on new legislation to address bullying in schools across America. They spent the afternoon in the Capitol building sharing their ideas about how adults could better support young people who were struggling with these issues. Senator Patricia Williams from California was so impressed by their presentation that she asked them to help her draft a bill that would provide funding for conflict resolution programs in schools nationwide. Zara felt honored to be part of such important work, but she also felt a heavy responsibility knowing that millions of children were counting on adults to create safer environments for them. During their meeting with the lawmakers, she spoke passionately about the need for schools to celebrate diversity instead of just tolerating it. She explained that when students learn about different cultures and traditions, they become more understanding and less likely to bully others who seem different from themselves. The media attention from the Washington, D.C. conference opened up even more opportunities for Zara to share her message of hope and healing. She was invited to appear on national television shows and speak at conferences around the country. Publishers contacted her family about writing a book that would share her story with young readers everywhere. Major companies wanted to sponsor her anti-bullying programs and help expand them to schools in other states. While Zara was grateful for all the attention, she never forgot the lessons her grandfather had taught her about staying humble and remembering that true leadership means serving others. She made sure that any money raised from her appearances went directly to funding conflict resolution programs in schools that needed help the most. She also insisted that Bryce be included in all her major speaking engagements because their story of transformation was more powerful when they told it together. During the summer between 7th and 8th grade, Zara traveled back to Ghana with her parents to visit her grandfather and the rest of her extended family. The village had heard about her success in America, and they welcomed her home as a hero. Children who had never left their small community listened with wonder as she told them about life in America and encouraged them to dream big dreams for their own futures. Her grandfather organized a special ceremony where the village elders blessed her work and gave her a traditional warrior's necklace that had been passed down through generations of their family. The necklace was made of gold beads and carved wooden symbols that represented courage, wisdom, and protection. Her grandfather explained that wearing it would remind her that she carried the strength of all her ancestors and that they would guide her as she continued her mission to help young people around the world. When Zara returned to Jefferson Middle School for 8th grade, she found that the positive changes had continued to grow and spread throughout the district. Other schools were sending delegations to learn from their conflict resolution programs, and teachers were being trained in new methods for preventing bullying before it started. Zara was elected student body president by the largest margin in the school's history, and she used her position to create even more opportunities for students to celebrate their differences and support each other. She started an international culture club where students shared foods, music, and traditions from their families' homelands. The club became so popular that they had to move their meetings to the gymnasium to accommodate all the students who wanted to participate. Parents began volunteering to help with events, and the entire community became more connected and supportive of one another. The most meaningful recognition came at the end of 8th grade when Zara was chosen to deliver the graduation speech for her entire class. Standing at the podium in her cap and gown with her grandfather's warrior necklace gleaming beneath her collar, she looked out at her classmates and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey they had all taken together. She reminded them that 3 years ago she had been a frightened girl who felt like she didn't belong anywhere, but with their friendship and support she had discovered that home wasn't a place on a map, but a feeling of being accepted and valued for who you are. She challenged her classmates to carry the lessons they had learned at Jefferson Middle School into high school and beyond. She told them that each of them had the power to be a force for good in the world and that their generation could create a future where every child felt safe, loved, and supported. As her classmates cheered and threw their caps into the air, Zara knew that this was just the beginning of a lifetime dedicated to making the world a more just and compassionate place for all children. When Zara first stepped into Jefferson Middle School, she was a frightened newcomer from Ghana, carrying not just the weight of her accent and unfamiliar clothes, but the ache of feeling invisible in a place that seemed to have no room for her. Yet the day Marcus Thompson tried to humiliate her in the cafeteria by spilling food down her white dress became the day she discovered the fire inside her. The day she realized that standing tall could change not just her own destiny, but the lives of countless others. And from that moment onward, the trajectory of her life was never the same, because while the world saw a shy immigrant girl suddenly defending herself against a bully, what truly happened was that Zara unlocked the first glimpse of the strength her grandfather Kwame had always told her she carried, a strength rooted in generations of warriors and healers who had fought not to dominate, but to protect, not to conquer, but to uplift. And as word spread through her school and later through her community about the girl who had flipped the biggest bully with a move that looked like magic, Zara began to realize that courage had a ripple effect far larger than she had ever imagined. So by the time she entered high school, she was no longer the timid girl hoping to disappear in the back of the classroom, but a young leader whom teachers called upon to mediate conflicts, whom classmates turned to when they needed someone to listen, and whom administrators praised for helping turn Jefferson Middle into a model of student-led conflict resolution. Yet Zara herself never sought the spotlight because she remembered her grandfather's lesson that true leadership was not about being seen, but about seeing others, not about commanding, but about serving. And so when she walked into Ridgeview High School as a freshman, she carried both her textbooks and the quiet determination to build something even greater, knowing the challenges would grow, but also believing her fire was ready to meet them. Her first year in high school was not easy, for though the story of her middle school bravery had reached many ears, not every teenager welcomed her with open arms, and she found herself again facing whispers about her accent, mockery about her head wrap, and doubts about whether someone like her could fit into a fast-paced American high school culture that celebrated athletes and cheerleaders more than quiet peacemakers. But Zara did not retreat this time. Instead, she began small, joining the debate team where her clear and steady voice surprised even her coach, volunteering for student council where she learned the art of organizing events and listening to different opinions, and above all, continuing the anti-bullying circles she had started years earlier by creating a weekly unity forum where students shared their struggles. And though only a handful of kids came at first, word soon spread that Zara's forum was a safe place to cry, to confess, to heal. And by sophomore year, the room overflowed with students sitting on the floor, teachers slipping in to observe, and even parents writing letters of thanks because their children had found courage through her group. And as this movement grew, so did Zara's confidence, her once shaky voice now carrying across auditoriums, her quiet fire now visible in her eyes, until it became impossible to ignore that this girl was building something extraordinary within the walls of Ridgeview High. By junior year, Zara's influence stretched beyond her school when local newspapers picked up her story, describing her as the Ghanaian teen turning pain into peace. And soon she was invited to speak at community centers, youth conferences, and even city council meetings where she urged adults to take bullying as seriously as academic achievement because the wounds of cruelty could scar a life more deeply than failing a math test. And though she was nervous each time she stepped on stage, she always remembered her grandfather's words, that the ancestor stood behind her, guiding her, filling her lungs with breath and her heart with courage. And it was this ancestral strength that kept her grounded even as cameras began flashing and opportunities multiplied. Because while other teenagers obsessed over prom dresses and football games, Zara spent her evenings drafting proposals for peer mediation programs, writing essays about cultural pride and resilience, and Skyping with her grandfather in Ghana, who beamed with pride as he reminded her never to forget her roots, never to trade humility for fame, and never to stop training her body and spirit in the disciplines of patience, balance, and respect. Senior year became the turning point of her youth because she was elected student body president by a landslide, not because she promised easier classes or longer lunches, but because her classmates believed in her vision of a school where every voice mattered, where every culture was celebrated, where every act of cruelty was met with accountability and compassion rather than silence. And under her leadership, Ridgeview High became a beacon in the district, hosting cultural fairs that filled the gymnasium with music, food, and dance from dozens of countries, launching mentorship programs that paired upperclassmen with struggling freshmen, and creating a restorative justice council where bullies and victims sat down together to find understanding rather than punishment. And by the time she walked across the stage in her cap and gown, the warrior necklace from her grandfather gleaming beneath her robe, she was no longer simply Zara the immigrant girl, but Zara the leader, the bridge builder, the voice that had turned whispers of doubt into thunderous applause. And universities across the country clamored to recruit her with full scholarships and honors. Zara chose Howard University in Washington, D.C., because she wanted to remain close to the heart of leadership and policy. And in those hallowed halls of history, she found herself surrounded by peers who carried their own stories of struggle and resilience, and together they formed a circle of young visionaries determined to reshape the world. Yet even among these brilliant minds, Zara stood out for her ability to blend passion with compassion, fire with gentleness, vision with humility. And soon she was leading campus movements not through protest alone, but through dialogue. Not by shouting down her opponents, but by listening until they heard themselves in her silence. And it was this unique approach that caught the attention of professors, local leaders, and eventually national organizations searching for voices that could heal divides rather than deepen them. And by the time she graduated summa cum laude with a degree in sociology and a minor in international relations, she had already spoken at the United Nations Youth Assembly, sharing the stage with activists twice her age, and she had been named to Forbes' list of 30 under 30 for her groundbreaking work in education reform and youth empowerment. But Zara did not stop there because the fire in her chest refused to be contained. And with her family's blessing, she founded the Global Youth Alliance for Compassion and Equity, a nonprofit dedicated to training young leaders around the world in conflict resolution, cultural pride, and social justice. And within 2 years, her organization had chapters in 20 countries, from schools in Brazil working to reduce gang violence to villages in India, teaching girls to stand up against child marriage. And everywhere she went, Zara wore her grandmother's head wrap and her grandfather's warrior necklace, symbols of the heritage she carried proudly into boardrooms, classrooms, and parliaments, reminding the world that strength and wisdom were not confined to Western textbooks, but lived and breathed in African traditions, passed down through generations. And though she often felt the weight of exhaustion, the endless travel, the heartbreaking stories of children who had suffered far worse than she ever had, she never let the flame die because she remembered the cafeteria. She remembered the laughter of bullies, the sting of food dripping down her dress, the tears she fought back. And she knew that her journey had begun there, so that no child anywhere would ever have to feel alone again. In adulthood, Zara became a voice heard on the world stage, addressing the UN General Assembly at 27, where she spoke of a generation rising from classrooms to Congress halls, from playgrounds to parliaments, declaring that cruelty will not define us, that borders will not divide us, that the future belongs to the compassionate. And her words echoed across the chamber, drawing standing ovations. But what mattered most to her was not the applause of diplomats, but the letters she received from children across the globe, notes scribbled on torn paper, saying, "You gave me courage," or "I told my teacher I was being bullied because of you," or "I want to be like you one day." And those letters she kept in a wooden box carved by her grandfather's hands, opening it whenever doubt threatened to consume her, letting the voices of the young remind her why she fought, and still she grew, writing books that became bestsellers, teaching courses at universities that blended African philosophy with modern conflict resolution, advising governments on education policy, and yet always making time to return to Ghana each year, where her grandfather, now older and frailer but still filled with wisdom, would sit beneath the great baobab tree and remind her that no matter how many awards she won or stages she graced, she must always return to the root, always remember that the truest measure of her journey was not how many headlines she made, but how many hearts she healed. And as Zara knelt at his feet listening to the stories of warriors past, she felt the same fire burning, not wild and frightening as it had been in the cafeteria, not nervous and trembling as it had been in her first speech, but steady and eternal, a flame that could never be extinguished, because it was no longer hers alone, but belonged to a generation of children across the world who had chosen to rise, to resist, to rebuild, and to lead with love.